Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast with LaChina Robinson is brought to you by Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Sign up, $38 a month, your chance to release a child from poverty with the most trusted child development ministry in the world, impacting lives for the kingdom of God. Over 150,000 children came to know Jesus Christ as their Savior because of the great work being done by Compassion International. And here's how you can get involved. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum and sponsor a child. It's great. You go to the website, you find the child that you want to sponsor, pray about it, and then make that move, make that decision, and go and sponsor a child in Jesus' name. $38 a month provides food, education, medical care, and vocational training, all done in Jesus' name. Here's the website, compassion.com/sportsspectrum. $38 a month. Release a child from poverty today. LaChina Robinson's our guest here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. She is a college basketball analyst covering women's college basketball and the WNBA for ESPN. She's also the host of the Around the Rim podcast with ESPN on ESPNW, and also covers WNBA games for the Atlanta Dream for Fox Sports South, and has been doing that for over a decade now. LaChina played college basketball at Wake Forest and is the winner of the 2018 Dawn Staley Excellence in Broadcast Award. She's also a woman of faith who loves Jesus passionately. You can sense that when you hear her interviewed, and I think you're really going to like our conversation. LaChina Robinson, not much to not like about this woman. She is awesome, and I think you guys will like hearing her journey here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Take a listen. LaChina, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Jason. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you on the podcast, and so much to talk about and a lot going on. Let's talk about your schedule, because you got your hands in a lot of cookie jars, and they're all good ones. But tell me about what it's like right now. We're taping this in early to mid-February. College basketball is in full swing. You know, the WNBA gets kicking in a couple months. Tell me about the day-to-day and what that looks like for you right now.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. So my schedule is really, really crazy at some times of the year, and then more, I would say, a little slower during other times of the year. So I knew right away that I wanted to cover college women's basketball and the WNBA full time. And the challenges with that is that there's not really a lot of networks that carry a ton of women's basketball inventory, with the exception of obviously ESPN. So I kind of have made a life being a freelancer, where I work for multiple networks. And so what that kind of looks like as far as my schedule is, January through April is definitely my busiest time. Working ACC women's basketball for Raycom, my ESPN college basketball package. I used to do the Big East on Fox. I'm not doing that anymore, but doing probably, I'd say 2, sometimes 3 games a week. And so I'm in 2 or 3 different cities a week, and with the prep and all that, obviously it's a lot. And then with the podcast, just keeping my eyes on the national landscape and kind of just having a broader idea of what's happening around women's college basketball. And we're lucky, I say that being funny, but we're lucky that this year, right after the Final Four, we have the WNBA draft. So like a week after. So we go right from college basketball into the WNBA draft. But then there is a little bit of a lull until the season starts at the end of May. And then WNBA goes all summer. I work for the Dream as their analyst, and then I work for ESPN, and that rolls all the way through October. And then college basketball starts again in November. So that's what my schedule is pretty much like. But yeah, it can get crazy sometimes.
No, it sounds like the world of broadcasting, which I want to get into a little bit with you in a minute about what it's like. There's very few people who I know who are in this business that, it doesn't have the word crazy attached to it in some way with the schedule and with the way they work. But I want to go back a little bit. You said that you always knew that you wanted to cover, especially the WNBA. 10 years now in this business, if I'm not mistaken. Do you remember that first broadcast, the first one you ever did?
Yes. So the first game that I ever did on, I would say the ESPN family of networks was in 2009. And this kind of shows you how God works. I know we're going to talk a little bit about faith as the podcast goes on, but
Yes.
I did not major in broadcasting, communications, anything. I was a sociology major who left college thinking I was going to be an athletics director. And so somewhere in my late 20s, where I always tell people I kind of met God face to face, there was a shift, in what I was doing in my career. And I felt, God pulling me towards broadcasting, despite the fact that I did not have any qualifications and no experience and all of that. So, but being obedient, I got into it. And in 2009, I got my first call from ESPN for a game. And my first game was at Madison Square Garden. And it was a doubleheader between Tennessee, which Pat Summitt was still the head coach at that time, and Rutgers for Vivian Stringer. And then the other two teams that were playing were Baylor and Boston College. It was Brittany Griner's freshman year. So here I am, my first ever broadcast on ESPN, and God's like, okay, this is what we're doing. And I'm at the Mecca of basketball at MSG. Calling a game with these legendary coaches and players. So it was really a welcoming and kind of like one of those testaments to what God can do when you're obedient.
Holy cow. MSG and, two legends. I mean, most people get started in like a gym in high school with nobody in attendance and nobody's even watching, but you're starting at the Mecca. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Jason, I was so scared. And that was my first ESPN broadcast. I had done some radio, actually started in radio for Georgia Tech, and I was also already working the radio broadcast for The Dream, but this was my first, television assignment from ESPN. So yeah, it was wild.
That's awesome. Now, if I'm talking to 10-year-old LaChina Robinson, is basketball a part of your life? Maybe even talk about the faith side of it. And if I said, hey, in a few years, when you're older, you're going to be broadcasting college basketball, women's college basketball, what would 10-year-old LaChina say to you or me?
No way. I was definitely a late bloomer when it came to basketball. Now, I had two older sisters that played. One played in high school, and the other did at least start college basketball. She didn't make it all the way through, but I just was not into basketball at all. And the crazy part about it is that I'm the only child that my parents have together, and I am the tallest girl on both sides of the family by far. So
6'4",
when I was,
right?
Yeah, 6'4". So I think when I was about 10 years old, my mother said, she kept trying to put the hand-me-downs on me from my sister. And she was like, I don't know why this dress isn't fitting you. It should be fitting. And she was pulling it down. My legs were just so long. And so, everyone knew that, the height that I had would be good for basketball, but I just wasn't interested. I wanted to do what my friends were doing. And you get that when you're young, you want to do what's popular and, what looks fun or what girls, quote, should be doing. So I was a cheerleader, and then my legs got too long, couldn't do the flips. I was always on the base of the pyramid. But it was when I was about 14 years old, there was a guy in my community named Michael J., who just kept coming to my house, through my teenage years. Because I tried basketball a little bit when I was like 12, but didn't love it, so I gave it up. But he just kept coming by and saying, hey, you should really try this. And then, my mother was like, I don't know, basketball seems a little rough for girls. She wasn't into the female athlete thing. And then he just happened to mention one day that I could get a college scholarship. And my mother said, we will be there tomorrow morning. What time is practice? So that was the beginning, that we knew that I could get a free education. My mom did not know that. And as soon as we caught wind, obviously that was something that, just was the initial motivation to get into basketball. So anyway, long story short, 10-year-old LaChina would never have dreamed of playing basketball. And then also, a career in broadcasting. I think at that age, I probably wanted to be a lawyer. Both of my parents are from Boston, so Harvard was always what my parents would push. Like, you should go to Harvard. They just wanted me to go to the best school, and they were always about education. Yeah. And so, it was, I wanted to be a lawyer. And then as time went on, basketball just impacted my life. It was one of those things where being 6'4" at 14 years old is the most uncomfortable situation I felt like I could ever find myself in. Low self-esteem, really, wanted to be like everyone else, wanted to fit in. But when I touched the basketball, when I stepped on the basketball court, it was like God channeled me to a place where I belong. I felt like I was empowered and I was important and I understood my height as a part of basketball and understood more of my purpose, how to communicate. I met friends. So it was the best thing that could have happened to a 14-year-old girl and has really opened every door and every opportunity I've had since then.
Is that still something hard even today, that you've been out playing for a while, but you're in the game as an analyst, but just being 6'4", that's going to stick out even just going to the store, a very tall woman like that. Is that something you still have to deal with?
It's something that I obviously, yes, I still, I guess, deal with, but it's all positive. Like
Good.
Jason, I always tell people, if there's one thing about me that I would never change, it's my height. And I never imagined I would say that growing up, right? So you kind of get to college and I don't know what happens, like the light switch went on and I started to love it. I started to embrace walking into rooms where people were staring at me. And I walk into a room and people automatically think I'm someone important. Now, I don't know why, being tall has that effect on people, but it's really just been one of the most empowering things that I've ever experienced, in terms of my physical attributes. And it has its challenges for sure. I mean, buying clothes are hard. I can't walk into an average store with 38 inseam and just buy clothes. But, there are not a lot of dating has definitely got its challenges too.
Yeah.
So there's that. But overall, I love it. And now I can stand tall. And there's been so many young women that come up to me and say, I hate being tall. Like, how did you get so confident? So that's my message. Part of my testimony is just embracing who you are and embracing what makes you unique.
LaChina Robinson is our guest here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. So we talk about faith in sports here a lot on this podcast. You mentioned faith. You mentioned meeting God face to face, I think you said in your 20s. So let's talk about that. Tell us about your faith. I know it's important to you, when that kind of took shape and maybe the moment or moments that really helped you kind of draw a connection to the Lord.
Yeah, so I remember going to Sunday school as a very young girl. My mother used to put us on, the vans on Sunday morning, and we would go to Sunday school. And those were just some of my most memorable childhood moments, like on the bus singing, like I was in the choir, even though I couldn't sing at all. And Brother Felon is the guy, he would come to my house all the time and knock on the door to see if we were coming to Sunday school. So I remember learning about Jesus very, very early as a kid. And then, we went to the same church pretty much for most of my, I would say, early teens. Actually, I think we started going to Ebenezer AME Church maybe when I was like 11 years old. And before that, we had gone to Crossroads Baptist Church. I'm from Alexandria, Virginia. Okay. So once I got to Ebenezer, my mom enrolled me in a rites of passage program. And that was probably one of my first really impactful experiences as a young Christian woman, because we were paired with mentors. We were in a group with other young women who, were just transitioning in life. Basically, they were trying to help us transition from kind of that pre-teens into the teenage years and give us some shape, give us some form in the Lord before we went on to college or whatever endeavors that we were going to go on after leaving home. And so that experience was amazing. I mean, I learned how to pray. I learned that there were specific parts in the Bible that were meant for women in particular to help us deal with the various issues we were having, whether it is low self-esteem, whether it is, how God sees a Proverbs woman. It was just, it really shaped me. And then when I went off to college, Jason, I really got off track. As it pertained to my spiritual health. And I never connected with a church home when I was in college. And that hurt me. Not everyone has to be in a church to feel connected to God, to serve God, but I do. It's something that nourishes me, that fulfills me, that refills me, that makes me feel whole. Like I have to be in the house of the Lord. And so, in those college years, I really lost my way. I mean, I would have to make a very long list of things that I struggled with in that time. And I eventually found my way back after graduating from college. I found a church home. And when I moved to Atlanta, when I graduated from Wake Forest, I did an internship in Greensboro for a year, and then I moved to Atlanta and basically joined a church as soon as I got here, and have attended the same church for 16 years. And so that experience, has been everything to me. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you that Destiny, which is the church that it actually, unfortunately, recently closed their doors, but for 16 years, was the foundation of my life. But in my late 20s, I went through another crisis. And, I felt like I was going through one when I got out of college because I didn't have a foundation. But then in my late 20s, I just went through a terrible time. It was definitely God's hand on my life. I was physically sick. I was depressed. I was told that I may even, I needed like mental help. Like I was just struggling with my thoughts and staying positive.
Yeah.
And that's when I met God. I mean, I was at my deepest, lowest point. I thought I was going to die, like physically die. I felt spiritually dead. And it's really when I met God face to face, and he showed me a vision for what he wanted the rest of my life to be like. And I really have never looked back in terms of my faith and its strength and its importance in my life since then.
That's an awesome story. Tell me about just staying grounded in the Lord. I mean, the way you described you're scheduled and just being busy, and there's busy times and there's slow times. And in many ways, it's kind of like our faith, right? Sometimes we're all in and we feel it. And then sometimes we feel a little drifted away, but we're still connected to the source. Tell me about kind of carrying that newfound faith that you say you haven't walked away from in this, many few years since that time meeting God. Tell me about staying grounded in your faith as it pertains to the work that you do. Obviously, we can't preach the gospel in terms of the work that you're doing in basketball, but tell me about how you stay grounded in your faith.
Yeah. No, thank you for that question, because I'm even getting emotional as I think about it. But I say that I am so fortunate and sometimes feel unworthy of the desire that I have for Christ, right? Like you look around the world and not everyone has a desire for Christ, and that's fine. We all have different lives, different paths, whatever. But for some reason, since God grabbed a hold of me and my life and my heart, I can't get away from it if I tried. I have a craving for his word, for his presence, to do whatever it is he wants me to do with this life, because I almost lost it. In that moment in my late 20s, I know for a fact if it was not for the Lord, I would not be here today. And so once you've been impacted to that degree, it just alters your life forever. And so I wake up and I think about God every day, and I'm thankful for that. Because that has really been the driving force. It's not about waking up and saying, oh, I see a cross, like, let me pray, or, oh, there's my Bible there on the desk. If I never saw any mark of the Lord when I wake up, he's on my heart.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that. So that's what guides me every day, honestly, is just the fact that I know that who I am is rooted in him. I knew I would not have anything if it was not for him. I would not have this platform in broadcasting. I wouldn't be here. I mean, none of the connections I have, not even the joy I'm fortunate to wake up with every day. I would not have any of that without him. So everything that I am goes back to him, and that includes my broadcasting career. I mean, I told you the story about Madison Square Garden. That is just a small snippet of all the things that God has done throughout my career, from opening doors to making connections to, people that I've been able to meet and interact with and be inspired by that I would have never imagined as that 10-year-old girl, right?
Yeah.
And so it is not lost on me that at any moment these things could be taken from me. And if they all are, when that happens, if it happens, I will still be a child of God. I will still be loved by him. And so that's the most important relationship for me to maintain. So despite the busy schedule and all that, I know what's important to this life. I know what's important to my next life. And it's all about my spiritual well-being and my relationship with God. So I carry that with me every day. And yeah, we can't necessarily preach the gospel on air,
Right.
but I know that sport is very, and it's not lost on me, that sport is very connected to life. You know, I mean, the young women that I walk into the gym with, they're basketball players, but they're also daughters. Some of them are facing health challenges. Some of them are facing low self-esteem like I did as a kid. Some of them are lost in their place in life. And the only way I know how to help people, Jason, is not through me. It's through God.
Yeah.
And if I can be even a bit of inspiration, either on social media or if they, interact with me and feel my spirit, they often ask me like, how did you know what you wanted to do with your life? And what is your purpose? And as soon as they ask those questions, I am eager to share with them that, hey, this is not about me. This is something that God provided for me. And so I know that more than anything I could ever give another person, connecting my life to God and making sure they understand that, at least for me, that is my foundation. That's how I find my way. That's how I've been able to stay encouraged. That's how I've gotten through tragedy. If I can make that connection for them, then maybe they make that connection and can, start a relationship or cultivate a relationship with Christ.
I'm wondering, I know you saw this. We're taping this in it's February 6th when we're actually taping the interview. And yesterday, the story came out from Maya Moore sitting out the WNBA season. I'm sure you saw the story. And her reason was to pursue her purpose, to know Jesus and make him known. And that really kind of stood out for me. I mean, obviously it made headlines because of it being Maya Moore, but because of the reason that she's stepping away from the WNBA is to kind of pursue her faith even deeper. What were your thoughts when you saw that story?
Oh man, I was like I was holding back tears, honestly.
Yeah.
It's just it's encouraging to see someone like Maya really take a stand for Christ, right? Like,
Yes.
and what I mean by that is, in this world, we often get confused, and I'm a part of it, like with how important fame is, how important money is, how important opportunities are, position, network, all that stuff. Your car, how much money you make. Like, we can get so caught up in those things. And it's beyond refreshing to see someone like Maya who, is choosing her purpose over popularity. Is choosing her purpose through Christ over, her basketball career, which is the thing that has driven her for years. I mean, that is her gift. That is her talent. And she's taken a moment to be conscious about God's purpose in her life enough to say, you know what? I'm going to put that aside and I want to serve. I mean, she talked about ministry and to everyone else, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right?
Yep.
And that's often the places where God takes us, where it's like, okay, I'm going to ask you to do something that I need you to do. And because the rest of the world functions differently, you're going to look a little crazy.
Yeah.
This is going to look like, what in the world is Maya Moore doing? But Maya understands that life is so much more than our talent. It's so much more than our job and our career. But she wants to make Jesus known in this world. And I can't think of a more powerful moment that I've been a part of where my faith and basketball have intersected than what Maya Moore did yesterday.
Yeah.
And she is going to inspire so many people to look deeper into their walk with God, to look deeper into their purpose, to really question what we're doing every day, what decisions we're making every day, how we're spending our time. Maya wants to make an impact on the world beyond a basketball game. And not to say basketball has a huge impact. I mean, you know and understand we use it as a vehicle to touch the world. But there is a whole nother level to this where God has called us to serve, not only in this world, but to be invested in what happens to people beyond this life. And I am so, I am just so inspired. I've started to do an inventory on my life, right? Like as
I
soon
think
as I
we
saw
all have
Maya,
to, right?
yeah. I mean, I definitely started to look at things very differently after that announcement. Just so excited and so proud of Maya and in awe of her courage.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're called to do. We're called to go and make disciples. We're called to be known through Christ, and then to make Him known through all of what we do. But to walk away from that level of play, I'm sure a lot of money and endorsements and things like that, and just say, you know what, I just need to figure out my life in who I am in Christ. I mean, that is so bold, and yet I think, like you just said, it makes us all want to examine our lives a little bit more, more on a
Yes.
deeper level, right?
Yeah, I do. We get so busy and we get into the day to day, we get comfortable, we get into the just regular schedule of what we're doing. And, I believe that we have to sit down sometimes and evaluate how we're spending our time and what's important. And so I'm so excited for Maya.
A couple more questions here with LaChina Robinson on the Sports Spectrum podcast. So our greatest lessons often come, I think, from our greatest failures. What's a failure for you that taught you a valuable lesson in your life? It could be a faith one, or it could be something from basketball or broadcasting, whatever it might be. What's a great lesson that you've learned from a failure or something that didn't go the way that you wanted it to go in your life?
Yeah. So one thing that God has been working on me with is um, being more of a servant. And a place where I have failed and have not been at my best is in my relationships. I admit that I have often let my ambition get ahead of me and can get very consumed with work. And I had a situation happen a few years ago where I had a friend that just basically told me that I wasn't a good friend, that I had not checked in on her enough, that there were some things that she had told me about that I just was kind of bypass or say, oh, it'll get better, we'll pray. But basically that I wasn't being a good friend. And I've always valued my relationships, and it was an eye-opening moment that I was failing a lot of the relationships in my life. And a lot of it was because I was putting my job and career and those kind of things in front of my family and people I cared about. And it really caused me to go back to God and pray about what is the root of this. And again, it was some selfishness, right? That was there, but it was also just, again, not allowing myself to be a servant to others, not stepping back enough from what I had going on to listen. When I ask someone, how are you doing? Actually listening, maybe offering some solutions, being more engaged in other people's lives. And some of that included cutting down. You can't be a friend to everyone. And I think sometimes I've tried to spread myself too thin, but kind of prioritizing and asking God, every day, like, who do you want me to touch? Who is it that needs me? Making sure that I'm intentional about my prayer list. Like I would tell people all the time, I'll pray for you and then not do it. And so this was one of those moments where God was like, okay, LaChina, you suck as a friend and you're sucking as a sister and as a daughter. And so over the past few years, I've definitely tried to be more intentional about getting my eyes off of me. And, just being more invested in the lives of others. And that's what I say 2019 is about. That's what 2018 was about for me, even is I'm happy with how my career has gone. I could not ask for more from the Lord in terms of what I've accomplished in my career, but now it's time for me to give more to others. And I think finding out that I was a failure as a friend was definitely one of the turning points that helped me, find my direction and what's important to me now.
Your Twitter bio, or I should say your Instagram bio, actually lists Ephesians 3:20 as a verse. Is that a life verse, sort of a verse that means something to you? Can you share that verse and what it's meant to you?
Yeah, so Ephesians 3:20 is now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we could ask or imagine according to his power that is at work within us. And I just get excited when
That's
I think
good. That's really good.
It's so one of the things I remember, one impactful moment for me when I was starting my career. I was reading the Bible, studying the Word, and I was reading the story about Jesus was giving a group of blind men their sight, and, he was healing them, giving them their sight. I mean, can you imagine going from being blind to suddenly being able to see? I mean, I don't know if I know there's a lot of great miracles in the Bible, even Jesus raising people from the dead, but
Yeah.
getting your sight just resonates with me. And so in this story, there was one blind man that did not get his sight. And the reason why Jesus was unable to heal him is because he didn't believe. And I said to myself in that very moment, LaChina, if you are ever going to miss out on getting your sight or having a blessing of any kind in this life, or Jesus doing a miracle for you, it will never, ever, ever be because you did not believe. I promised myself that in that moment. So this verse brings me back to everything that God is able to do, right? So no matter if I'm experiencing sickness, I'm discouraged, I'm out of a job, I have a family member that's struggling, no matter what it is, I always come back to this verse that my faith is the foundation. But if I put all of my faith in the Lord, he can do so much more than I could ever ask or imagine. Like, just think about what that means, because I've got some big dreams, Jason. I sure you do too, right?
Absolutely.
And so this verse is a reminder to me that he can do more than we could ever ask.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter what happens in my life now. And I'm so proud of this. And I have my moments where I'm like, okay, Lord, are you really listening to me? And we have our discussions back and forth. But I know that nothing that happens in my life is out of the scope of him fixing or him helping me through or him overseeing or him turning into good, even though it may seem bad. And that just allows me a freedom that I just can't even explain. Like, I can go out and live in the world every day, no matter what happens. And there are going to be bad moments. There are going to be challenges. And I can't even tell you the number of tragedies I've experienced in my life. No matter what, God can fix it. He can help it. He's there. He is aware of everything that's happening in my life. So even my bad decisions, even my mess ups, even my things that I'm not proud of, he can turn it into good. He can use it as a testimony. And that has just allowed me to live my life free, knowing that ultimately everything that happens in my life, he has allowed, and he's in charge.
What's God teaching you right now in this season of life? This is what we'll close with, the last question. What are you learning from God in this moment here, February 2019, that he's been teaching you, that's been impressing on your heart lately?
That there are seasons in life, that we have to embrace those seasons, even when they don't feel good, even when they're uncomfortable, even when they may be unpredictable. 2018, I had a really rough year. I mean, I lost my brother. My mom has just been dealing with so many deaths in her life, from her husband 2 years ago to family and friends this year. And so trying to, help her through some challenging times has really been tough. It's hard to see your parents struggle.
Sure.
But I can't even make a list of things that 2018, it was just hard. And so it was also a year where I experienced great success. But at the end of the year, I was exhausted. And I was like, Lord, I can't do this again. Like, I just simply don't feel like I have enough in my cup. And so 2019 for me is the word replenish. That's my word for the year. And it's the season that's been very hard for me to embrace slowing down, prioritizing my life in a different way, being willing to listen to God in terms of what he wants from me next and not just moving on my own. Just taking a step back on everything and allowing for a refocus, for a recalibration. Again, somewhat of what we're hearing from Maya is, getting in touch with, this is where God needs me to be right now. I know that he would not have allowed 2018 to happen the way that it did if there was not this time he needed for me in 2019 to show me what he has and to replenish me and to refill my cup. I mentioned that I'm looking for a new church home now. That is a challenge because I've always just been able to go to the same place on Wednesday and Sundays, and get the word. So that's something where I've been intentional. So just more listening, more sitting still, just being willing to look outside the box, even in my broadcasting career. If God said today, you need to give this up because there's something else I want to do, I want to be in a place where I can hear him and be willing and obedient to do that, to surrender. So I would say that's the biggest thing he's dealing with right now with me. And I'm a headache for the Lord. Is really, embrace this season of your life, LaChina. I know that you like to go, go, go. I know that, this is not the pace of life you're used to, but this is where I need you to be to fulfill my purpose. So that's what I'm embracing.
She is LaChina Robinson, college basketball analyst. And you can listen to her podcast, just like you listen to this podcast, over on ESPN, ESPNW, called Around the Rim. Check it out. LaChina, it's been great talking to you here in your journey, and I look forward to meeting you in person someday and giving you a high five and hopefully having you back on the podcast again.
I would love that, Jason. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing for the Lord. It is a blessing really to have someone like you that's out here allowing us to tell our stories and hopefully bring more lives to Christ ultimately, which is the goal. So thank you so much for your work as well.
And many thanks to LaChina Robinson for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. I really enjoyed talking to her, listening to her story and her passion for Christ, which, listen, every one of these interviews that we've done is the same story about people intersecting their world of sports and of faith in Christ. But some have a little bit more passion about when they talk about it than others. And LaChina has, like she said, in the morning when she wakes up, she has this joy about her that is exuding and is, attractive, I guess, in a lot of ways to want to talk to someone and listen to their story. And she has that. She has that passion. She has that joy. And I really loved hearing her story on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Give her a follow on Twitter at LaChina Robinson, LaChina Robinson. On Twitter at LaChina Robinson, and let her know that you heard her story and her journey here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. And please share this podcast as well, wherever you are on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Leave a review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts. If you want to let people know about this podcast, that's a great way to do it. And certainly any sharing that you do, we'll retweet or share on our pages as well. If you tag us on social media, we're at sports_spectrum. Thanks for listening to this podcast. We want to thank our sponsors, Compassion International. Again, it's $38. We talk about it a lot, but it's really an amazing way for you to make a difference in a child's life. $38 a month. Compassion.com/sportspectrum is the website, and it's the most trusted child development ministry in the world. Check it out, compassion.com/sportspectrum, and sponsor a child today. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Brand new episode coming your way tomorrow. We so appreciate you joining us and listening to this episode of Sports Spectrum. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.